Ready.
Can you guys hear all those little kids through my mic?
I cannot.
Nope.
Okay, good. It sounds like there's like some fossils and rocks and stuff in my building, so there's always like middle schoolers running through it.
Sounds terrible.
Yeah, it's a happy place.
From ScienceSortOf.com, you're listening to Science Sort of.
Hello and welcome to Science Sort of. You're listening to episode 304, and our theme this week is AGU Part IV, To See an Ocean in a Grain of a Foram. I'm your host, Ryan, and joining me to talk about things that are science, things that are sort of science, and things that wish they were science is once again Patrick.
Hi there.
And Charlie.
Feels like I was just on the mic.
Now, you know, guys, I can tell you're both very impressed by my highly literary reference to Auguries of Innocence by William Blake in the theme for this week's episode. This might be one of the themes I am the most proud of. I'm going to go ahead and call it now.
Okay.
I thought it was really good.
It's okay to take pride in your work.
Yes.
Yeah. We've been podcasting for over 300 episodes, and eventually I got one I was happy with. So I think that's not a great ratio, but I will take the accolades as they are bestowed upon me. But before we get to that, this week we are featuring an interview I did with Heather Ford, who, interestingly enough, was in grad school at Santa Cruz when this show was first beginning, which I believe we talk about in the interview. But it's kind of weird that, like, now 10 years later, we're still talking to people that knew us when?
Right. Back before.
Knew us when we'd huddle around a single snowball microphone in whatever room we could hide ourselves in Earth and Marine Sciences.
Small world.
So Heather is a paleoceanographer, and she studies. Well, I'll let her tell us in her own words. So this was a fun interview. Heather was in town for AGU, but the meeting was already kind of winding down by the time we were able to sit down and talk. And Heather has some friends in DC, so she knows the town a little bit. And so she actually suggested that we go to a brewery for the interview. And I was like a little nervous about it. And we picked a weeknight that was hopefully it wasn't going to be too crowded. It wasn't. And the bartenders were fine with me setting up my stuff to record. And so we got to record at a brewery. So I'll be doing a drinks segment with Heather that was recorded live in the interview. And then we're going to take a break and come back and do a drink segment with Patrick and Charlie. So let's hear about Heather's science. So I'm being joined post-AGU by Heather L. Ford, Dr. Heather L. Ford, who is living in the UK as an NERC Independent Research Fellow / Lecturer in Environmental Science at Queen Mary University of London in the School of Geography. And Heather, thanks for joining us on the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Ryan.
So you self-identify as a paleoceanographer.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, so can you give us in broad strokes what that means for the kind of research you do?
Paleoceanography tries to reconstruct ocean conditions in the past. So the root is sort of paleo, which means past. So it's past oceanography is the direct translation. What we do is we use sediment from the bottom of the ocean, either organic proxies or fossils that we can find within the marine sediment to reconstruct either surface ocean conditions like temperature or carbon, and also deep ocean characteristics, like how water circulates in the deep ocean or how the ocean stores heat and carbon over long periods of time. Mm-hmm. So paleoceanography can extend, really good records can extend back 65 million years in terms of high resolution records. And then there's, it just sort of depends on the question that you're interested in terms of which time period you research.
The fossils you get, is this what like we see with that marine snow where it's just kind of things are constantly slowly drifting to the bottom of the ocean and building up over many years?
Yeah, so marine snow is a major way that stuff gets exported from the surface ocean down to the bottom. So if you look at a single particle falling through the ocean, it actually would take a really long time to get to the bottom of the ocean according to Stokes settling law. But because things aggregate in the ocean as marine snow, they actually move much faster to the bottom of the ocean.
Also, there's a settling law? That's kind of cool.
Yeah, exactly.
And you did your PhD work at University of California, Santa Cruz, right?
That's correct, yeah.
So we were stalking the halls together when this show was being born back in the day,
no,
which is kind of fun.
I remember when you were sort of starting it up, yeah.
We were putting up flyers all around the department. So we've known each other for a while. I don't think I ever had you as a TA, though.
No, I don't think so. Because you were doing your master's when I was a PhD.
No, I was doing my undergrad.
Oh,
I was
okay.
undergrad. So, but I was working in
Paul Koch's lab,
but whenever Paul Paul didn't have money to fund me for a semester or a quarter, he'd send me to Jim. And so I did work in Jim Zakos' lab a lot.
That's right. Mm-hmm.
So I did have my foram education and my time with the IODP sediment. So is that the same kind of stuff you work on? Are you also doing ocean drilling?
Yeah. So, now we call it ocean discovery, actually.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that.
Yeah. So the ocean drilling community has gone through a bunch of different names. It was called, one of the first iterations was the deep sea drilling program, and then it was the ocean drilling program, and then it was when they became more of an international consortium, it was the international drilling program.
That was the IODP.
That was IODP. It's still IODP, but now it's International Ocean Discovery Program. And it's in part because they wanted to get away from the word drilling, which has kind of oil connotations.
Yeah.
But it's just the breadth of the science that they're doing is much broader now. So a lot of stuff that they've been focusing on is deep biome. So figuring out what microbes are at the bottom of the ocean and actually understanding that there's a huge pool of carbon just related to deep sea life, deep sea microbial life. That we hadn't really understood before. And one of those discoveries is really through ocean drilling that we've been able to explore that.
And so from what I remember working in Jim's lab, you would have these ocean cores that literally get sectioned out centimeter by centimeter.
Right.
And then within that 1 centimeter of core, even in a part of a section of that 1 centimeter could be hundreds of forams.
Yes. Yeah. So foraminifera are these little protists that live in either the surface of the ocean or the bottom of the ocean, and they make their homes, essentially their shells, out of calcium carbonate. And yeah, depending on where you are in the ocean, it could just be like a foram sand, like you would go to the beach and you have these little forams that are about the size of a single grain of sand. It could just be entirely that. Or if you go to someplace like in the middle of the ocean where the only stuff that kind of gets into the middle of the ocean is just dust, it could just be all kinds, just fine grain silt and dust and that sort of thing. Yeah. It really depends on where you are.
Okay, and so where do the majority of your samples that you're working with come from?
So I work a lot in the Pacific. Most of my PhD was looking at changes in the tropical Pacific, so looking at changes in tropical Pacific conditions over the last 5 million years, but I also looked at changes in ENSO variability, or El Nino Southern Oscillation, from the most recent time, the Holocene, to the last glacial maximum. And so to do that, actually, what I would do is I would take those single grains of sand and I would ablate them with a laser. So
yes,
just like
I'm so glad. Okay, I want to talk about this because I love this laser.
Yeah.
I've gotten to use one of these laser ablation machines before as well. And I think it's maybe the most fun scientific instrument. For me, it feels like getting to pilot the Death Star. Because you're just pointing this laser at this thing and blasting it.
Yeah. No, so every time I would set up the laser, like the first time, you do like your calibration or the standard, I would be like, fire the laser! Because it was just so exciting to be able to work with a laser. It's super cool. And then just the analytical capabilities of looking at something so tiny. I mean, these are you're literally making spots on something the size of a single grain of sand. This is like tiny upon tiny, and figuring out the chemical composition of that one fire.
And if people are wondering, well, wait, wouldn't that destroy the specimen? Yes, it is a destructive analysis.
Yes, it is. Yeah, but you end up having these tiny little holes in the forams.
You and I were both featured recently on AGU's The Bridge for National Fossil Day, and you sent them a photo of what it looks like when you've blasted the same foram a couple of times. And so I will link in the show notes to that for people to go check out. And so once it's been blasted by the laser, what kind of data pops out for you to then collect and
I'm mostly
analyze?
looking at minor and trace element data. So these foraminifera, they're made out of calcium carbonate, but things like magnesium and strontium will substitute for the calcium. And then in case of magnesium, that's actually, that substitution for calcium is actually temperature dependent.
Oh, really?
So you can use the magnesium to calcium ratio to reconstruct things like temperature. And so what I did is I essentially used populations of these single shells, these foraminifera, to reconstruct temperature variability using the magnesium to calcium ratio of these little laser spots, essentially.
Okay. Is this species specific as well? Because I know when I've worked in foram labs, like we had to not only gently extract these fossils from a very fine grained sediment, which, we were using like diluted Calgon solutions, so like almost like bubble bath.
Right.
Baby soap sort of thing. And then once we did that, we still had to go through and pick out the individual genus level foram that we were looking for. Nautiloides, I think, was the one Jim was interested in.
So the same thing with like stable isotopes, like oxygen and carbon. The minor and trace elements are also species specific. So I compare it to looking at when you put these out on a tray and you look at them underneath a microscope, and I compare it to like looking for a single breed of dogs when you've got like, you're looking for all the border collies, but you have to wade through a sea of like St. Bernards and Boston Terriers and Schnauzers just for the border collies or whatever I said. But yeah, just that one particular breed or species or genus that you're interested in.
Having done it, it takes hours and your eyes are exhausted at the end of it. It is not fun.
It's pretty time consuming, or it can be. Yeah.
I got to a point where I could set up my laptop like kind of angled sort of almost behind the stereoscope, and so I could be like watching Netflix through the stereoscope when I lifted my eyes up for just a second.
No, when I was doing my postdoc at Lamont, I literally watched all 6 seasons of Gilmore Girls while constructing one record at one site. That's how much picking time it took.
Nice. My wife's doing a Gilmore Girls rewatch right now.
You know, it was one of those things that I missed out on when it was actually on TV, so it felt like something that I needed to, some cultural experience I needed to catch up on.
Mm-hmm. And I don't want to make your work sound like total tedium and drear, because you do also get to go out to sea. I mean, you're a paleoceanographer, you get to spend time on the ocean. So you also, when you're going out on those cruises, I saw that you was reading up that you take like these 2-month expeditions. Is that when the drilling or the sampling is happening, or what's?
Yeah, a lot of the ocean material is either collected on kind of shorter cruises or kind of month-long cruises, or even a week or two. But the main program that I was talking about earlier, the Ocean Discovery Program, those expeditions are 2 months long. And oftentimes you don't have a port call, like you are on the ship, and those are the same holes, if I can curse, that you can see.
We have the bleep button ready.
Okay.
No, it's good. It's good.
The same people that you'll see for not, just they're the same people that you will see for like 2 months. So you better be nice to everybody.
That's so funny.
Yeah.
I heard a story about a woman who was doing work on stable isotopes in tuna. And she was doing compound-specific stuff where you look at like individual amino acids and then the stable isotope ratio within that amino acid, which is incredibly powerful. And my advisor's like, oh, you should do that too. And I'm like, nobody's done even the basics on sloths. Let's start. Start a little more simple than that. But it sounded like she had the absolute best experience on the cruise, because her entire job was to wake up in the morning, go fishing, catch a giant tuna, take a couple of grams of tissue, and then give it to the cooks.
Yeah, I'm sure the cooks were like, thank you.
And everyone on board loved her because they were eating like fresh tuna every day.
Yeah, no, in the couple of the cruises that I've done in the equatorial Pacific, that's exactly what happens. You go fishing, or at night, usually when you're working on deck, you have these huge floodlights. So you end up being like this little beacon of biological activity, because things like squid or any things that sort of visual predators will come and just swarm the boat. So we would get things like calamari in the evening.
Oh, awesome.
And then the mahi-mahi, and it was pretty tasty.
So is the boat working 24 hours a day to collect data? So it's all shift work?
Yeah, oftentimes. So either, it sort of depends on how the chief scientist does it, but either you'll have an 8-hour shift or a 12-hour shift. So a lot of times I'll work from like midnight to noon, or noon to midnight, or some combination of 8-hour shifts kind of, but everybody kind of rotates through, or you're just given one shift for the entire time. But even on like shorter cruises that I've been on that have been like 4 or 5 days, when you're on site to collect material, you have to be up, so you kind of sleep when you can.
Do you get burnt out by the end, or do you kind of get in a rhythm?
You definitely sleep for a long time once you get back to land, and so one time I did this cruise in the Santa Barbara Basin, and like you either eat sugar or caffeine or something like that to make yourself stay awake. And by the end of like this 4-day cruise, I had gained like, 6 pounds in jelly bellies, because every single jelly belly has like 5 or 6 calories. And I was just like shoving them into my mouth to stay awake, and I didn't realize how calorific they were.
When I was in undergrad at Santa Cruz, hot peppers. I would, if I was needing to like pull them all nighter to stay awake, I would eat like a hot pepper. It's just, my mouth would just be on fire, and I was like, I can't do sleep, or I'm just totally.
Oh.
Yeah.
Ouch. Yeah.
Well, it's because like once the spiciness goes, like I feel like the spiciness would leave my mouth before the caffeine would if I started drinking coffee. So I was trying to game the system that way.
Right.
Probably doing as much damage.
Well, I mean, yeah.
So you go out on these cruises, and you're out there for 4 days or 2 months or whatever. And then that's when you're collecting these sea cores. So like, what are some of the places you've gone, and why were those places chosen as like the sites to go sample?
Well, one of the cruises that I went on was to this place called the Line Islands, which is a set of islands / atolls or deep sea mounts that are in the Central Pacific. And the reason that was interesting is that there was basically no material there from the Central Pacific at all, but it ends up being this key place for understanding some El Nino Southern Oscillation dynamics. So there's two different flavors of El Nino Southern Oscillation. There's kind of the big ones that you think about, like the 97, 98 El Nino, where you had this huge temperature anomaly over by Peru. But you can also get this mixture El Nino event where actually some of the processes or some of the temperature anomalies are in the Central Pacific itself. So we went there specifically to kind of understand what the average conditions of this particular area were, and then also understand how the variability in that particular region changed over, the last 100,000 years or so, 150,000 years.
And is that length of time looking at sediment cores over that range, is that about average for a study you would do, or do you go longer, shorter?
Oh, I go longer because I've done records up to about 5 million years old, but it really kind of just depends on the question. Like one of the questions that I was interested in when I was doing my PhD was ENSO variability, but
ENSO stands for
El Nino Southern Oscillation. Gotcha. So the records that I generated before I needed to graduate were just for the most recent, the Holocene and the last glacial maximum. But I did have interest in looking at El Nino Southern Oscillation farther back in time. But again, I had to graduate, so...
Yes, I feel like projects often get cut off just because, okay, I'm done. It's time.
No, and another graduate student has since picked that up. Her name's Sarah White. She's also at Santa Cruz, and she's done a really great job with generating those records. So, yeah.
That's awesome. I forgot to ask when you were talking about the magnesium to calcium ratios, how do you control for the fact that the ocean temperature varies along the vertical height of the ocean?
Well, actually, you can use how different foraminifera live in different parts of the ocean to your advantage. So when they're making their shells, they essentially record the chemistry of the water that they live in, so the temperature of the water that they live in. So you can look at foraminifera that live at the very surface of the ocean, foraminifera that live like 1,000 meters or 4,000 meters, and foraminifera that live at the bottom of the ocean. And whatever their depth habitat preference is, you essentially get a temperature signal from that depth.
That's really cool. So not only are you getting a record through time, you're also getting a record of height in the ocean.
Right, exactly.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
And so what kind of results are you finding? Like how much variability is there in paleocean currents? Like how much is the ocean changing when humans aren't forcing it to do so? It can change a lot. For instance, one of the things that I've really been interested in is understanding the thermocline through time. So the thermocline is this area of the ocean in the upper part of the ocean where temperature rapidly changes with depth. So it's a large thermal stratification kind of layer in the ocean. And it's shallow enough that like scuba divers hit it, right?
Yeah, in some places. So in places like the equatorial Pacific or in upwelling regions, you can go through the thermocline at 20, 40 meters or something like that. And I think most basic dives, you're allowed to dive for something like 40 feet. But yeah, it's something that you could feel if you were...
I've had just recreational dives that have gone down to 80, 90, depending on the conditions. Yeah. And I mean, there's not... Depending on the water quality, there might not be as much to see down there. But.
Right. So the research that I've done has shown that part of the ocean, that thermocline, has changed markedly over the last 5 million years. And by a large temperature swing as well, like looking at... It doesn't sound like a lot, but looking at 4 to 5 degrees centigrade temperature changes in the thermocline in the Eastern Pacific over the last 5 million years. And that ends up being important for how not only the ocean circulates, but also how the atmospheric circulation might change over those time periods.
Is it hard to convince people that like sometimes water just doesn't mix with itself? Because I feel like that's something that it always takes me a minute to remember, like, oh yeah, it's not just a well-mixed pool of water, our oceans. They're kind of like, there are different layers and different things happening. And,
yeah. No, that's actually an interesting point. So like one of the things that I've done for when I've been teaching as a TA or something like that, we'll talk about different water masses in the ocean. So water masses are essentially... or like deep water masses are these water masses that form in high latitudes where water is dense because it's cold and it's salty and it sinks into the ocean's interior. And the way that you kind of get around that idea is you can use fish tanks or water tanks or something like that, and you can create like a salty water mass that essentially flows to the bottom of the tank, and it stays a very distinct water mass. It doesn't mix with the water above it or anything like that.
always so strange to me, but yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, like things like diffusivity, right, is actually a very slow process. Think about like a bottle of wine, you know, like if you cork a bottle of wine, you're like, oh, I'm just going to let it breathe. Well, it's not going to breathe. It has a tiny little area in which the wine is exchanging with air, and diffusivity just doesn't work that fast.
So we know if we go to your place, we're going to see a decanter.
There would be a decanter.
You're going to have a nice decanter.
And you're going to have like one of those little aerators so you can, aerate the wine as
Wine
it gets
people
poured.
tell me those aerators work very well.
Yeah.
So I'm not a wine person.
I have one. I'm just lazy and I don't ever really use it. But yeah.
That's cool. So, I do vertebrate paleontology, and I often think about what I do in terms of like telling stories. And so do you think of the ocean in the same way? Is like the ocean the character of your stories, or is it the forams, or like how do you put it all together in your head, like big picture, when you're telling people about your science?
I think what's interesting about geology or paleoceanography or geology in general, vertebrate paleontology, is it's a historical science. So it is it lends itself to being a story. But actually the way that I pitch the work that I've been doing more recently is, so I study this time period called the Pliocene warm period. It's a time period about 3 to 4 million years ago, which is kind of our closest analog for future climate change. So carbon dioxide levels are similar to where they are today.
Do people who study the PETM get mad at you for saying that? Or because I feel like I hear that about the Paleoecene thermal maximum a lot.
Yeah, well,
that was a lot longer ago.
Yeah, well, and that was kind of Jim's jam as well, right? But I think there's certainly many, many questions about what the climate's going to look like in the past, right? And so one of those questions is, what does it look like when we're in high carbon states? So the Pliocene is one of these high carbon states where we know CO2 is estimated to be about where we are right now with human inputs. The reason that the PETM or any of those thermal maximums are useful is because the records show that there was a large release of carbon in a geologic instant, right? Not like now kind of instant. So that provides us an understanding of how the ocean or the Earth system really reacts to inputting a ton of carbon and what happens after that. What does recovery look like? So there's utility in understanding both time periods. It's just I've been really interested in warm periods because it does provide kind of our nearest analog for what do warm climates look like when they're kind of in equilibrium. What can we imagine that might happen during those time periods?
We also know that right after that Pliocene warm period, we started going into ice ages with some regularity.
Right. So I'm really interested in looking at how the ocean basically stored heat and carbon. So where was the heat in the ocean? Where was the carbon in the ocean? And does that kind of influence the way that we think about what climate might look like in the future?
And so what are you finding?
If you look at deep ocean circulation today, there are two places where deep ocean water masses form. There's one in the North Atlantic and there's one in the Southern Ocean. And these are the major ways that it's called the Atlantic Meridional Overturning Circulation, or AMOC. And this is one of the major ways that the Earth moves around heat and carbon today and on glacial, interglacial timescales more recently.
And I think, I don't mean to interrupt you, but I think people don't often hear how important that is from a planetary sense, because one of the reasons that life is possible on Earth is because there are energy gradients that move stuff around.
Right, exactly.
And you don't see that on Mars. I don't even think you would see that on Titan, a planet or a moon that has things flowing on it. But it's this fact that we have a warm equator and cold poles.
Right. We live on a rotating planet with plate tectonics, right? And so we have these thermal gradients.
Mm-hmm. We're talking with our hands a little bit because that's what geologists do. We talk, but yeah. So it's really important to the story of Earth that heat is moving around in the ways you're talking about.
Yeah. And so those are the two major ways that the ocean accommodates heat and carbon in the most recent climate. So looking at the glacial, interglacial timescales over the last 2 million years. But at this time period, one of my collaborators, Natalie Burles, who's a modeler, in some of her climate models, she actually sees that there's a Pacific deep ocean water mass, which is pretty unusual. Today, there's only an intermediate water that forms, so a water mass that goes down to about 800 to 1,000 meters. We don't really see deep ocean ventilation in the North Pacific. So she sees that in the Pliocene. But I guess what's kind of concerning about that is that if there was what we would call a PMOC, a Pacific Ocean Meridional Overturning Circulation, is that today the ocean stores a lot of carbon in the North Pacific today. It's the oldest waters. They're about 2,000 years old, and they're incredibly carbon rich. So if you start essentially irrigating that deep water, where does the ocean accommodate that carbon? Does it go somewhere else in the ocean, or does that change kind of the carbon budget for how much can be stored in the ocean during the Pliocene? And can we sort of expect that more carbon might be moving into the atmospheric system?
Interesting.
Yeah.
Huh. That's really cool. If you wanted people to kind of come away from hearing us chat about this with one sort of big take-home, big picture message about the work that you do, what would be like the one lesson you would want to make sure they know, or the one thing about your work that you think is worthwhile or important for people listening to understand? I agree that it's worthwhile, obviously. But
I know. Some of it is that we just do science for fun, right? Or at least that's sort of the perception. I guess that the major thing is that we can use the marine sediment archive to help inform future climate change. I think that's just the major take home from any work that any paleoceanographer does. And so specifically, I'm interested in past warm periods as those analog for future climate change, so that we can improve model performance for the models that are. They're often used.
I hear from climate change deniers that our models don't work that well. So
they work reasonably well, right? But the same models that we use for past climate reconstructions are the same class of models that we use for like the International Panel on Climate Change, Governmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC.
IGPP.
International Panel.
Intergovernmental
Panel on Climate Change. Yes.
IGPCC.
No, it's IPCC, but now I'm forgetting what the acronym. Sorry, I'm like half a beer in. No,
all right.
Really. But those are the same class of models that we use for those future reconstructions. So it is about testing model performance on the data that we can generate in the past.
That's great. Well, I mean, and the people who criticize the models aren't going to be satisfied until the model is so accurate that it might as well be Earth.
Exactly. They're going to pick apart like different things. But, there are things that, this is one of the reasons that you can use paleo work. If you see that there's poor performance in the models, okay, well, what did the past climate reconstruction say? Can we figure out what those processes and mechanisms that are going to be most important for predicting future climate change? This is also a research tool that we can use.
And also, like, to bolster what you're saying, when people who are not fans of climate change science say, like, well, you guys don't really know what you're talking about, I will remind them that we are now talking about recording the ocean's temperature by firing a laser at a shell the size of a grain of sand to measure two different elemental ratios, and from that back calculate a temperature. So it's like we've done our homework. We kind of have thought about this a little bit.
Right, yeah.
So that's really cool.
Yeah, no, I enjoy it. But yeah, I've had kind of ridiculous conversations with people. Like there was one conversation that I had with a guy who was actually, I don't remember if he was on the Capitola Water Board or the Santa Cruz Water Board, or he was in some sort of water board capacity. And he was asking me really detailed questions about CO2 reconstructions in ice cores. Ice cores aren't my jam, but I answered the questions to the best of my ability. And he was like, yeah, I just don't believe it. I don't believe in global warming. And I was like, you are literally responsible for water resource management in an entire community. And that's having people like that in those sorts of positions of power that influence people's water resources over the next 20, 30, 50 years, especially in a resource limited area like Santa Cruz, that is a travesty.
Water issues are a big deal in that part of the country. And Santa Cruz, I remember there being big fights in Santa Cruz, locals versus the university, about how water was going to get allocated as the university expanded.
Yeah.
I always joke with those people that we shouldn't let them use anything on their phone that was generated by the scientific method that they're doubting, so you can't use GPS anymore, sorry.
Right.
You don't believe it, so why would we let you use the GPS scientists
You can't have Tang, you can't have Velcro, you can't have lots of things.
Yeah, so I just always think it'd be funny to take things away until they play nice, or learn that maybe it's not the way they think it is. And the weird ways people choose to doubt parts of science is always fascinating to me.
Yeah.
But you mentioned that we're having a beer, so with that, I think we will move over to our next segment, which is What Are You Drinking? We are recording live at Atlas Brew Works here in DC, a brewery you suggested, and that's fascinating because you don't live in DC, and so you suggested the brewery we came to. So tell us what you're having here at Atlas.
I am having the blood orange Gose. I don't know if that's how you say it, Gose. And I'm enjoying this particular beer because sours have been kind of my jam over the last 2-ish years. I like a good sour. Nice. And it's a good sour.
I have had a little trouble getting my engine going today, so I'm having the Coffee Common. So it is their common California-style steam ale, but with some coffee in it. Local coffee from Compass Roasters here, also in DC.
Yeah.
And
and a steam ale is a lager brewed like an ale, or vice versa?
Oh, that's a good question. It's one of the few truly American styles because Anchor Steam came up with it.
Yeah.
And I actually don't know.
Yeah,
the
it's one or the other. It's like either the components of a lager brewed as an ale or the components of an ale brewed as a lager.
I think it must be brewed as an ale because ales are easier to make than lagers. So if you're going to flip it in a direction for a small production, I think you would flip it in that direction. But don't quote me on that. I could look it up right now, but it's more fun just to be wrong and get the emails.
Yeah. What do you mean you don't know?
And I've toured the Anchor Steam facility, and I don't remember right now. So, and I think it might also have something to do with actually using like a steam powered something or other.
Oh, really?
There's something. The steam part is important.
Yeah, I think it's one of those San Francisco originals, right? Like it's like that and fortune cookies. I think
there's some debate over fortune cookies.
Oh, I thought they were definitely like a California thing, or at least a U.S. thing.
Yes, I believe that is not up for debate. The debate comes from, did they come from the Chinese American community or the Japanese American community in San Francisco?
Okay.
I listened to I think it was a 99% Invisible podcast. They did an episode about the fortune cookie.
Okay, but either way, it came from San Francisco.
I'm pretty sure that's true.
Okay.
I don't think that is in dispute. I think it's just the culture of origination.
Okay.
Because we obviously associate them with Chinese food now,
Sure.
but there's like some reason to believe that it might have been the Japanese community that came up with them.
Okay.
But yeah, it was Anchor Steam beer that came up with this technique for the California Common Steam Ale, and then it was Fritz Maytag, the like guy who inherited the Maytag fortune, found out about this, like was in California, had this beer, really liked it, and that like I think Anchor Steam was about to go under. And Maytag was like,
it?
Yeah, Maytag was like, I'll make you flush. And yeah, so we have like a guy who inherited a bunch of money from laundry machines arguably to thank for like the American craft beer movement in the modern era.
Cool.
If Anchor Steam had gone under, it's possible that craft beer would not have taken off in the U.S. the way it did. So, or at least recovered from prohibition the way it needed to. Well, cheers. Thanks for joining me to have a drink and talk about science.
Yeah.
Some of the work Heather does to understand the temperature of the ocean in the deep past, but I can tell you that the temperature in our drinks, no, I can't tell you that. I don't know. I'm fumbling right now.
Can't really drink the ocean because of all the salt, but you know what you can drink.
I feel like we've used that one before, but we're going to go with it.
Water everywhere, but not a drop to drink.
Oh, another poem. Much like the Titan of myth, we carry the weight of the world. No, I'm just probably going to go with a combination of the ones Patrick and Charlie used, and then I'll drop in the music. Will not be an episode of Science Sort of if we didn't also talk about what we are drinking. Patrick, I've been making you go first a lot, so I think I'm going to mix it up and make Charlie go first.
All right.
Well, here I am at work again. Opened my drawer, and this time I pulled out some Oi Ocha green tea, cold brew. They say on the side of the bottle, we use an authentic Japanese cold brew mizu dashi recipe to bring you the smoothest, most refreshing green tea. Steeping our finely milled Japanese matcha in whole leaves and ice draws out a cleaner flavor and the naturally mellow umami sweetness of the tea, making this Japan's #1 cold brew matcha.
I believe you said almost that exact same tagline when you first had it on the show, but that's okay.
Yeah, I'm taking sponsorship offers.
I was going to say, yeah, do you have like your mic has a sticker on it now? It sounds like good tea. I am looking forward to trying it.
It is a very, very good nootropic. It's got a nice mellow caffeine lift and a nice letdown. It's not like espresso or coffee.
Well, here's what I will say, actually, Charlie, to turn your plug into an actual plug. Whenever any of us have a non-alcoholic pre-made beverage on the show, that's usually something I can link to using our Amazon affiliate account. Right, Patrick?
Yeah. Do it.
Yeah.
What happens when you go to an Amazon affiliate link?
We get a tiny bit of money you spend back to help support the show.
Take it away from Jeffrey Bezos, put it in our pocket, because you can't take it with you, right? That's what they say.
They say that.
You can if
I mean, not when you die.
Yeah, not when you die, but
referring to. But most of the rest of the time, you can take it with
unless you were a pharaoh in Egypt, which I feel like is what Jeff Bezos is angling for at this point. Some sort of pyramid full of servants and cats. Patrick, what are you having?
Whew. All right. So again, being in Britain, I decided it was time to. I've been avoiding Scotch most of my life, or they just call it whiskey here. But I figured it was time to dive in a little bit.
They spell it wrong, though.
Yeah, just a Y, no EY. So I went to the local spirits shop and asked for some advice, and I got steered to this Bruichladdich. It's a classic laddie Scottish barley. It's an unpeated single malt Scotch whiskey from the Isle of Islay. You'd want to pronounce it Islay.
I would want to pronounce it Islay. It's not Islay?
So wait, you got an Islay Scotch that's not peated? That's crazy.
I know.
Because Islay is known for like the kick you in the face
and actually,
campfire.
I don't really think it's completely unpeated. So it's still got a little bit of that kick you in your face thing going on. But like I said, I don't drink a lot of scotches, so maybe it's not peated at all. But I have had some other ones that don't have the this kick you in the face.
Yeah, like quality. The Highlands taste like an oatmeal raisin cookie. It's like raisin and vanilla, but. Try to give Jamie a kiss after that. It's not going to work.
Are you, do you do the drop of water or are you doing ice?
Just drop of water.
Drop of water. Okay. And I mean, are you liking it or is it still not quite to your palate?
So I guess it's not quite to my palate, but also for Christmas, Jamie got me a
Shetland pony.
Which tastes better.
To ride around Scotland.
Right. No, just I don't know like a bottle, basically, a decanter. That's the word I'm looking for.
Oh, nice.
To start sort of blending whiskey ourselves. So
cool.
And create our infinity bottle. So I think a little bit of this is going to go a long way in that decanter. And we've got a few other things that are going to sort of make up the base. And we've got a couple things we're just going to pour a little into and see where it takes us. So we're looking forward to that experiment once we get done with dry January.
I got my dad one of those like mini barrels that you can age your own barrel-proof white dog hooch in. Mm-hmm. It should be ready. I hope I'll have the opportunity to have some on the show at some point. It should be ready in 4 to 6-ish months. So we'll see. Stay tuned.
Will do.
I am having, nobody asked, but I'll tell you, I'm having a cocktail. This is a Cynar cocktail. It is a Cynar Manhattan. So it is a Manhattan with the addition of Cynar, which is a bitter Italian aperitivo that has a bunch of different herbs and spices, as many of those bitter liqueurs are wont to do. But this one is predominantly artichoke, which is, I believe, what Cynar means in Italian.
Yeah, that is an awesome amore.
Don't you mean amaro?
Amaro. Yeah, that's what I meant.
If you love it, then it would be an amaro that you amore.
That's amore.
Yeah. Yes, indeed.
So you're a fan. I figured you would be a fan, Charlie, of the Cynar.
Yeah. Yep. I like that one a lot.
Okay, so for this, you just do. It was the recipe suggested on the bottle of the Cynar, and this is not the extra overproofed Cynar. This is just the normal stuff, because there is like a higher proof Cynar that you can get as well. But much like Patrick Scott, one bottle of Cynar stays in your liquor cart for a long time. You don't go through it quickly, but it is something Julie really likes. So it's something we have on hand, and it's 2 ounces whiskey. I went bourbon instead of rye for this one, even though it calls for rye. 3/4 ounces of sweet vermouth, 1/2 ounce of Cynar, and a maraschino cherry. So I did that over some ice, and that's what I'm enjoying now.
Sounds good. I've never had Cynar, but I have seen it in various recipes for cocktails that I would like to try. So I'm sure this will, in the relatively near future, I'll be purchasing a bottle.
I would say it is a easier to mix, sort of like Fernet Branca almost. Is that fair, Charlie?
Yeah, and way less herbal. Fernet Branca is another Amaro. Amaros are just tinctures, right? Infusions.
I think they're bitter herbal liqueurs.
Yeah, you throw something into high proof alcohol and let it
macerate.
Mix.
Macerate.
Yeah.
Macerate.
Don't do it with opium. You'll get laudanum. It'll make you addicted and sick.
Good advice, Charlie. I have a book on Amaro that my parents got me for Christmas that I have not read yet because I've actually been trying to get a book read for the show. So soon I will know much more, Charlie, and we'll be able to speak intelligently to the joys of Amaro, but I'm not quite there yet.
Yeah, I don't know nothing. I just know from being in Italy for a few weeks.
But what I do know is that we've got some more chat with Heather, and in our second half of our conversation, we shifted to talking about some of the work that she is doing to help push organizations, in particular AGU, towards better gender equity of speaking slots at big meetings like this. So let's hear what she has to say about that. So the reason you originally reached out to me to come on the show was that in addition to all of your paleoceanographic work, you're also doing, I guess, more social science or advocacy work regarding equity and diversity, specifically gender equity and diversity in the geosciences. So you have been studying the way that big conferences like the one we just attended, AGU, 28,000 plus geoscientists. That was the number that they told the press at the end of the meeting.
Wow.
So 28,000 attendees, which is like the size of some places I've lived.
Right.
All in a convention center talking about geosciences.
Right.
I joke that it's like, yeah, all 28,000 of us get together to figure out what lies we're going to tell about climate change for the next year. Because it's super easy to convince 28,000 people to all work together and do the same thing. So you sent me the preprint of a paper you put together that has since been published in Nature Communications called Gender Representation of Speaking Opportunities at the American Geophysical Union Fall Meeting. So before we dive into maybe what you found, can you tell us kind of the genesis of what got you thinking about this in the first place?
Oh, goodness.
I should mention you have co-authors, Cameron Brick, Corinne Blaufus, and Petra S. Deckens.
Yeah, Petra,
sorry. A rock.
Huh?
That name means rock, and she's on our paper about geosciences.
Yeah,
I don't know if she's a geoscientist herself.
She actually is. Yeah, so she's my academic sister. So she also did her PhD at Santa Cruz with the same advisor, but we didn't actually overlap. And so part of this actually came from Petra. So Petra has been a really critical mentor in my career development. But one time she was the secretary for AGU for the paleoceanography and paleoclimatology section, and her assistant secretary wasn't able to come. His wife had pneumonia, so he was like, I can't come to the scheduling meeting for AGU. So basically this, everybody gets together after all these abstracts are done, and they basically create like the schedule. It's a bunch of postcards on a board trying to figure out things. And anyway, so I went there,
and then we all complain about where they put us afterwards.
Yes. Exactly.
So we have no respect or no love for the people who went through all the trouble to schedule things. All we do is complain about, like, oh, they put me on Friday afternoon.
Yeah.
I can't believe them.
Yeah, so. It's hard scheduling, and you're never really going to make anybody happy, especially the Friday afternoon people. But so it was one of those things where we were scheduling, and we'd see that there might be like one token white woman in an oral session, and we're like, this doesn't seem right, equitable, fair, any number of things. So we sort of like, one day if we could actually get the data and do the analysis. So that was kind of the genesis of it. And then I guess the motivation to actually do the work was, one, the Trumpocalypse. I think there were a lot of...
Were you in England when that happened already?
I was in England, so I just moved to England. So currently I'm basically experiencing the worst of two worlds, because I'm in the UK, I see the Trumpocalypse and like a giant dumpster fire in the United States, like on a weekly basis. And then Brexit is also a giant dumpster fire. So it's like, it's kind of nonstop. But so after the Trumpocalypse, I think that there were a lot of people of color and white women who were basically like, this is what do we do to make the world better? And I don't want to exclude men. I think men were part of that conversation as well, or white men. But a lot of the advocacy work, particularly within the science community, has been done by people of color and white women in the last couple of years. And so this paper that we wrote was really my way of dealing with some of the frustrations and some of the anger of the Trumpocalypse, and then also just career building as a woman has been incredibly difficult for me. So it's kind of an outlet for me to get rid of some of those frustrations. And then also one of the things that also came out was so Jory Lerbeck and Brooks Hansen. Jory Lerbeck is currently a graduate student at the University of Utah. She works on hydrology, and Brooks Hansen, who I believe is the CEO or COO, something. He's C-level for publications for AGU. They did an analysis of looking at gender for manuscript reviews and how male versus female editors handled papers. So they had done a gendered analysis. And I read that and I was like, oh my God, AGU has this data. And so I asked AGU whether or not they would let me do this analysis, and they were like, yes, absolutely.
Oh, so that was something I was going to ask, so they were on board from the start.
Yeah, no, AGU has been amazing in this. They've really opened up a lot of their database. And what's unique about AGU, the American Geophysical Union, is that they have a high quality data set on their members. They have demographic information for most of their membership. And this demographic information includes age, sex. If they're US-based members, it includes ethnicity and when their degree dates were, their highest degree, their degree dates. So they have a really rich data set to actually look at these kinds of implicit and explicit biases.
Were you surprised when they said yes, though?
No,
were you anticipating them to? I feel like I'm surprised, gladdened, but surprised to hear that an organization that large was willing to let someone come in and perform an evaluation that potentially could have ended up being really critical, and in some ways was, and that they were open to that and willing to, and didn't want to keep that maybe done internally and reflect on it privately, as opposed to letting you just literally put it out there.
No, I mean, I think that they have the data, and I think that they've reflected on some of their data as well, but really one of the four strategic items for AGU is the talent pool. They call it the talent pool, and it is to look at the diversity and equity and try and lessen some of those barriers of participation for geosciences. So geosciences ends up being like any STEM field. It ends up being generally like women poor, but in particular, geosciences are incredibly white. Okay. Super, super white. So they have been really good about actually being very forward thinking about diversity and equity. They have diversity and equity task force. They've renewed their code of conduct. They've been asking for reviews from the community about their sexual or their harassment policy. They're broadening their definition from just sexual harassment to other types of harassment like microaggressions, bullying, that sort of thing. So they're taking a very broad approach to tackling some of the barriers for participation within the geoscience community. So yeah, they've been very open about sort of the data's there, the data's worth looking at, and that's really the first place. Knowing that you have a problem is the first step to actually tackling that problem. Mm-hmm. And they've been trying to do that in a very mindful way as well. So after they came out with the publication looking at the gender diversity of their reviewers, they did this tiny experiment where they did a small intervention so one of the things that they saw is that male and female authors who submitted papers, for publication, weren't having gender equity in the reviewers that they suggested.
Okay.
So they did a small intervention where...
Or getting judged by a jury of their peers.
Yeah, exactly. So they suggest people that they think would be good reviewers for their particular manuscript. And so one of the small interventions that AGU did is they actually said, hey, when you're considering these names to submit, why don't you consider the diversity of the people that you suggest? And so actually the intervention worked the most on men. So men ended up being much more, the women prior to this intervention were already pretty egalitarian, but men, just having a small intervention, they ended up being much more egalitarian in the way that their gender suggested for reviewers sort of panned out. So when they saw that small intervention worked, they started the test pilot on one single journal, but when they saw that they were getting improvement in the numbers, they actually expanded that to all of the AGU journals.
And so just so we're clear, this is an editor who's usually a volunteer another scientist in that same field.
Yeah.
They receive the paper from the submission site that, the scientist goes and submits it to the journal, and then it is up to the editor to then select 3 other scientists to then review the work anonymously.
Yeah.
And so what you're talking about specifically is making sure that the people selected to review the work came from some sort of place of diversity.
Yeah, so in this instance, they looked at how the editors behaved as well, but in this instance, they were looking at how the authors submitting the paper behaved. And when they did that small intervention on the authors submitting and
because as an author, you're allowed to list names of people that you think would be a good choice.
Right.
No, I don't doubt this played a role either, but like you're also allowed to say people you would prefer not to
Sure.
review, which is usually just because like rivalries exist in science like anything else, and sometimes you just have to cover your own butt.
Yeah,
but
and I don't think they looked at that in particular, but it was
that's usually more like personal political than it is like I don't want a woman reviewing my paper.
No.
Yeah.
That would be. I would hope that if somebody said that, the editor would be like, "Well, then we're not going to review."
I just want to clarify because not everyone listening to this will have been through the scientific publication process.
No, that's a good point.
So I want to make sure everyone's on the same page.
Yeah.
And so based on that study, you thought, okay, well, the fall meeting is one of the biggest scientific congregations in the world.
It is, as far as I know, it is the world's largest physical sciences conference and certainly the world's largest earth and space science conference.
Yes.
So you said that there were 28,000 attendees. It's an incredibly high-powered data set. So the first analysis that we did was based on gender. And actually what was interesting is, so like most STEM fields, geosciences has a leaky pipeline for women in that women are concentrated in the student early career roles, and then you see fewer women at kind of mid-career or they call it experienced career levels. And women kind of, they leave the field more so than men. And so you kind of have to account for that. So when you look at the abstract analysis as a whole, you see that there is a distinct disadvantage. So women are invited less and are given oral presentations less than men. But that's due in part because women are concentrated at like student early career roles, and they might not, those people just aren't given talks as often.
Giving a talk is seen as higher status than giving a poster. And there is some data to suggest that that's true because there was a study that came out that showed that if you give a talk at a meeting, you are more likely to then get a paper from that same abstract or from that same talk than you are if you gave a poster.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
And there's been discussions among the community about like that posters are important, and I absolutely agree with that. I love presenting posters, especially when I'm early into a project, because you do get better feedback. But there is something about visibility of research. Like if you're an invited speaker or you're giving a talk, that's status. That's you disseminate those results to a wider audience than if you just have 5 or 6 people come to your poster. So there's that.
And the way it works is at these meetings, you submit an abstract. So you submit like a paragraph summary of the kind of idea or project you want to talk about. And usually every society meeting that I've gone to where I've had to submit an abstract, you can select, I want a talk is my preferred presentation type. I know we'll get into this a little bit with some of the results you found. Then you can say, like, I'll only give a talk if you don't want me to give a talk, just reject my abstract.
Yeah.
Then you can say, I want to give a talk, but if you want me to give a poster,
I will. Yeah.
And then you can say, I would prefer to give a poster.
Yeah.
And those are usually ranked in likelihood of that happening.
Yeah. The way that AGU organizes is actually when an author submits an abstract on the research that they'd like to present, the author is given 2 options. They can either be assigned a talk or a poster by the conveners, so the people organizing the session, or they can opt for a poster. So nobody can opt for a talk for AGU. That you can put comments in your abstract saying like, oh, this is going to be published, or this is published. It'd be really great to have a talk.
And the session conveners at this level are not the people who are putting on the meeting. They're not the AGU folks. They are other scientists who have proposed a session basically saying like, we would like an afternoon at AGU devoted to talking about Pliocene ocean circulation.
Right.
And so then you would usually try to get your community, your field of researchers. I've had to do this, organizing a session, to all submit their abstracts to your session specifically, and then you as the session convener get to decide who's giving talks and who's giving posters.
Right, exactly. And so when we looked at the data, we see that women are at a disadvantage when we look at the entire population of men versus women. But when we actually controlled for career stage, so looking at female students versus male students and female early career versus male early career, a lot of those relationships essentially went away. Actually, there was really good equity among career stages between men and women. So that was really encouraging. But then one of the things that we did is we also looked at the gender of the primary convener. So the primary convener is the person who is kind of in charge of organizing the session. They have co-conveners who provide input, but they're really kind of the person leading the show. So we looked at the gender of the primary convener and how they made allocations. So male versus female primary conveners. Male conveners control something like 73% of the abstract allocation. So they're doling out a lot of abstracts. And male primary conveners across career stages, so male primary conveners from early career to more senior levels, were providing fewer opportunities for their female colleagues.
To speak or to present at all?
To speak. So either as invited speakers or as oral presentations. So this is concerning because we sort of think about these, once kind of the old guard dies, or, once the dinosaurs kind of retire, everything will eventually get better. But actually we're seeing the same sort of gatekeeping from early career men as we do older career men. And the other part that's interesting is that basically the only reason that you see equity when you control for career stages is that women, with the small amount of abstracts they actually control, they over invite women relative to the proportion of women that are available in the abstract pool. So in this case, you're actually seeing that the underrepresented group is doing the bulk of the visibility or the equity work.
Gotcha. So the reason it worked out is roughly equal is because women are going above and beyond.
Right.
And the men aren't really pulling their weight.
Right. And I think that is in part because I think women and men kind of view equity a little bit differently. Like I think for women, when they're organizing a session, like they probably shoot for something like 50-50. And then men are like, 1 or 2 is fine. Because I've certainly been in sessions organized by men where there's one token white woman and suddenly that's a diverse session. Mm-hmm. So that was an interesting result. And actually what I've been working on recently, so I've been getting a draft of this together and I actually presented this at AGU, is that after this was published in Nature Communications in April.
And you also, I just want to add to what you said, you were looking at data across a couple years worth of meetings. You weren't just looking at one meeting, so we're not necessarily talking about a snapshot. And it does trend towards the recent. It was like 2014 to 2016 were the years you looked at,
it was 2014 to 2016. So this is a very recent summary of these data sets.
But I also think like 3 years is, I think, if you're seeing consistency across those 3 years, you are seeing a real trend and not just what happened at one meeting 1 year.
Right, exactly. And part of this comes down to data quality. Like we weren't able to look at long-term changes in AGU because the data quality in like the early knots or anything like that is just not as high. So it would have been interesting to see a latitudinal study, but it's nice to have a snapshot right now showing, yes, we have a problem.
And AGU is heading into its centennial year. Next year will be the 100 years of AGU, and they have a photo of the first, I think it was the first fall meeting here in DC. It was at like the Carnegie Institute or something like that.
Okay.
And it's like 25 dudes. And I think there was one woman there.
Okay.
I might be misremembering that, but it's just so funny to think about how and I think a lot of scientific societies have that like old-timey white men in suits, black and white photo of like our first meeting when it was just a handful of us, and now it's 28,000 strong and heading into a 100-year anniversary.
So what I've been working on just this last week, I presented some of these results at the fall meeting on Tuesday, is that after we presented the gender analysis, people were like, what about minorities? And I was like, that is an excellent question.
A more complicated analysis. But
it's a more complicated analysis for sure. But it's also, I would argue, it's probably a more important question because geosciences are incredibly white, more so than many other sciences. But yeah, it ended up being a more difficult analysis. The gendered study, and I do want to note that our understanding of gender identification is much more broad than male and female, but with the data that we have on hand, it ends up being a much easier binary analysis. But for things like ethnicity, you have many more categories, and it just ends up being a more statistically difficult analysis.
And there's mixed race people, which I know gender also being a fluid construct. There are people who identify as being in between genders, but that's hard.
Yeah, exactly.
Both studies could be more complicated.
So AGU does collect ethnicity data from its US-based members. When we were doing this analysis, we had to make a couple of hard decisions. So one of the things that we ended up doing was actually merging all of the underrepresented minorities into one category. So African Americans, Latinx, Pacific Islander, Native American were all lumped into one category, which in and itself is kind of problematic because it has some measure of erasure. Like these different communities have different barriers for participation.
And also, it's geosciences in a way that is maybe distinct from other types of sciences is very geographically oriented. So there's so many geoscience projects involve being in a certain part of the world or understanding a certain part of the world.
Right.
And so when you lack representation from those places, it, I think, can affect the prevalence of projects getting done in that part of the world or the way the data gets interpreted.
Right.
I met a really amazing woman at an event at AGU who is from Eritrea, and she's a soil scientist. And like, not a lot of people were talking about how a war-torn country, how that affects your soil. And like places where there are landmines. Like, A, it's harder to do soil science because there are landmines. And then B, like you're putting a bunch of explosive chemicals in the ground and then not telling anyone where they are and walking away.
Right.
So, so like getting that representation sort of can just totally change the way you view certain kinds of projects and certain kinds of opportunities to study parts of the world that might not have been on the front of mind before.
Right. And just kind of what you're echoing what you're saying is what's important to the community, right? And so, and what lens do you look at science through? And so we did do this analysis, and we actually saw that in the same way that women you kind of have a retention problem with women, underrepresented minorities are concentrated in the student and early career stages. But the other issue that we have with underrepresented minorities as a community is recruitment as well. So we're not getting in as many underrepresented minorities, ethnic minorities, as we should be based on the population of people. So there's two different issues there. And so we did see that underrepresented minorities were invited less and given oral presentations less than the other groups. But what was probably more concerning is that when we controlled for career stage, we still saw that underrepresented minorities were at a disadvantage. And some of these relationships weren't statistically significant, but in a descriptive way, they weren't being given the same sort of opportunities as their similarly career-staged peers.
Much like gender, statistical significance is a construct.
That's true.
We do also just decide at what, like, you can change the value you decide something is significant at. So if you're seeing a trend, it's not like in the scientific data where we necessarily have to like hold ourselves to a hard line there.
Yeah, well, and this is a huge issue in social sciences in general, right? So my colleague Cameron Brick, he is a social scientist, he's a psychologist. So one of the things that he had us do for this particular study is actually do a pre-reg or a pre-registration of our study to say before we even started the analyses, like which specific hypotheses we were going to test, what was going to be the...
We talked about this on the show recently, how that's a thing, becoming a thing in social sciences and psychology where so that way please, yes, I'll let you continue.
No, it's just so that you don't like go on a hunting trip to find a relationship, right? Mm-hmm. Like you come... before you even start the study, you document how you're going to collect the data, if you're going to collect the data, how you're going to treat the data, and those sorts of things. So we did this whole pre-registration process to figure out the specific hypotheses. We kind of did this for the gender as well, but it is becoming more in vogue in social sciences to actually document, hey, this is our plan, here's the result. And if we veered away from that, why we did that. Yeah. Because science happens, like people make different choices. Totally. But we've stayed pretty faithful to the pre-registration. But yeah, so...
That's cool. You're the first person I met who's actually done a study where that was something they did. That's really cool.
Well, I mean, this is due in part because being a paleocenagropher is my day job, and being a social scientist is my side job. And I really do rely on Cameron for kind of his expertise in that area as well. But then another thing that we were able to do, because the AGU data set is so rich, we were actually able to look at intersectionality. So intersectionality is this idea that I think was first coined by Kimberly Crenshaw. She's a law scholar at UCLA, excuse me.
You've been in London too long.
I know.
University College of London.
I know.
Go Bruins.
So she looked at this intersectionality is this idea that systems of oppression and can be interwoven for marginalized groups. In our particular analysis, we were interested in looking at the intersection of race and gender. So underrepresented minorities, underrepresented minority women, how did they compare in comparison to other groups? So, for instance, underrepresented minority women were provided fewer invited speaking roles in comparison to underrepresented men. And across the board, underrepresented women were invited less, and they were given fewer oral presentations than other women. So this is also pretty concerning, just to see the intersectionality of these results as well. So, yeah.
And so with the earlier study, you mentioned that one thing that helped was just telling male editors, hey, like, think about this when you're assigning reviewers. Do you think that's what's needed here, or what are some recommendations or just even ideas you think could help improve this situation as AGU moves forward into the next 100 years?
Yeah, I mean, I think that AGU started to do some of this because part of it is, certain measures of social nudging. How do you structurally change things? So I do think it's good that societies in general or conferences are really trying to provide opportunities for earlier career scientists or student career scientists, because this is the area that we see the most diversity in, right? In gender and ethnicity. So if you're concentrating on those roles or those stages, you generally have a more equitable, conference. And so I didn't organize a session this year, but I'm told that, or I know that, so the president of the AGU meeting, he sent out an email to all of the people who are convening sessions like, hey, you also have to consider diversity when you're setting up these sessions. And then also one of the things that they did when the primary conveners or the conveners were kind of deciding who gets talks is that they made the student and early career identifiers much easier to access. So it was criterion that it was kind of easily accessible versus somebody who was convening a session might have to dig around for it a little bit to kind of figure it out. So those are kind of the smaller things that AGU is trying to do with the way that we set up the meeting. So kind of a push for early career scientists or student scientists, and then making that identifying information easy for the conveners to see.
And then I know we do have a lot of student listeners. Are there tips, tricks, ideas, or things you would just want younger listeners who might be getting ready to start their career in science to know or think about as they get ready to start? And so, yeah. Any advice for the young folks out there?
Oh, geez. I think most people want to be helpful. And I think that it is a matter of just kind of reaching out. I think that there's so much implicit mentorship that people who are kind of in the know get without actually acknowledging it, which is one of the reasons that structured mentorship programs benefit everyone. Mm-hmm. So everybody gets an opportunity to talk to somebody who will give them career advice or anything like that. So find a structured mentorship program if you can. And then also find a diversity of mentors who might be able to help you. And these can be informal mentors or structured mentorships, but I think part of it is learning to network and learning to ask for help when you need it. I think that's a big thing that especially, people of color and white women have a hard time asking for what they need, I think sometimes. And, I think that most people want to be helpful, and part of it is just asking for help.
One thing I've told younger students when we're talking about stuff, and I'm doing some of that maybe implicit mentoring that you mentioned, is something Sora told me, I think. Sora Kim, former guest of the show and Santa Cruz PhD student, now back in the UC system at Merced. She was the one, I believe, who told me that, your advisor is sort of there to get you through the academic stuff. Your advisor's job is to get you out the door with the degree that you signed up to get with that advisor.
Right.
And sometimes the advisor can also serve that mentoring capacity, but sometimes they're too busy, or sometimes they want to keep a little bit more of that emotional distance because they're your advisor and you're a student. And so you don't always have to look to that one person for that kind of mentoring. If anything, your mentors, like you said, it's better to have a diversity of mentors. And to me, the role of the mentors is how do I get through the life stuff of being a scientist?
Right. And I think having a good peer group is really important for that as well. So I think that the cohort effect ends up being really strong. So for us, for instance, I think that there's been a really strong cohort effect for people in sciences in terms of us being successful in the field in many different capacities. Sora and I overlapped. She's now a professor at UC Merced. You're here doing science and talking science and still interested in science.
I think now that you've said it, I hadn't heard that term before. I love it. And I think there's a strong cohort effect on this podcast. There's definitely you are more likely to be on the show if we went to school together at some point.
Sure. Well, exactly. Because networking ends up being really important, right? I still keep in contact with people that I know from grad school who are no longer necessarily academics per se, but they are in various items. I have a friend who works at the EPA that I just had lunch with today, and I have a friend who I'm staying with. I did my master's with her, and she works in public affairs, and so the intersection of science and policy. And I think these are people are really key to keep in contact with because, number one, they're fun. They helped you get through your own personal experience, but they can also provide opportunities for people who are kind of interested in that sort of stuff as well. So in terms of professional development, you should always kind of keep a broad network for yourself and for people who, ask questions I'm interested in this. Do you know anybody who might do this? And then you're able to put them in contact. So yeah, cohort's incredibly important for sure.
That's really cool. I That was a really interesting answer that I never would have thought of.
Yeah.
And I'm glad to have that like mental construct in my head now. If people are interested in your work, where can they follow along with your adventures online? I will link to the archive pre-publication since that's the free version and Nature Communications isn't. And we had the guys who did...
No, in Nature Communications is an open source. Yeah, it's open source.
Oh, so we will link to that as well.
Yeah.
We also had the Earth Archive guys on the show, so I like to link to them when I can.
Yeah, no, I put it. It's actually the first and only paper that I put on the Earth Archive, and it was in part because I did it right before AGU because I wanted.
So you wanted it all out there.
I wanted it out there and for people to talk about it, and I did not get it together to put the underrepresented minority preprint online for this AGU because I got busy, but that will happen, and I hope to submit that soon.
Great. And then you also have a website, heatherl4.com, which we will link to in the show notes. Are you active on any other social media platforms?
I do have the Twitters. My handle is HL_Ford. And I'm also on Instagram with the same handle, and that is mostly adorable pictures of my dog.
Who's here with us? I forgot to mention that. What are you drinking, Sammy? You've been asleep most of this time.
Sammy's been sleeping. She's very fond of water.
That's good that her pet mom is an oceanographer then, or paleoceanographer.
Yeah. We had a bit of a weekend, though, because she, since I'm staying with my friend in D.C., they also have a dog. And I think Sammy didn't really get the social structure yet. She's still a puppy, so she's only 9 months. So she didn't
figure out the pack dynamics.
She didn't figure out the pack dynamics. So she spent the entire weekend peeing all over the place, just all over. But she's calm down now, and she's fine. But yeah, most of my Instagram is my dog, and then my Twitter is a mix of my dog and gender kind of stuff, and also just cool science that I do.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Heather.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Ryan. I really appreciate it.
I was happy for the opportunity. And we just got the extremely low battery light, so this is perfect.
Yay!
Goodbye, everyone. All right, well, thanks again to Heather for taking an evening to sit down with me and chat about all the work that she is doing, both scientific and more sociological, which I guess is still scientific. It's still data-driven at the very least, but coming at her scientific discipline and lifestyle from a very different perspective. And I learned a lot, and I hope you guys did too. And if you did learn something, or you have something you want to say about everything you just heard, you can write into us, and that might get featured in our final segment, which is the PaleoPOW. Coming up next. The PaleoPOW is the final segment of the show where we take time for the listeners. I mean, I guess technically all of this show is for the listeners, but this is the segment where we actually directly acknowledge your existence and speak back to that. We're going to start this time. We got another Patreon thesis, boys, and this one is for Edward A. And Edward is a longtime fan, but not someone we've had a ton of direct interaction with. I checked the records, and the first we heard from Edward was back in 2010. So Edward's been with us for a while. So
yeah, thank you, Edward.
Yeah, and been a supporter on multiple occasions through multiple avenues. So the patronage via Patreon is but the most recent of his efforts to help us make the show. So let's think of something here for Edward.
All right, let's see. What do we?
Something forammy. Something equitable. Something old timey. Something bitter. Something smoky, something peaty. Something new. Just trying to think of the things we've talked about. Something matcha. I still can't say that right.
All right.
Even the benthic forams, they still live on the surface of the ocean floor. They're not actually in the sediment, right?
I don't believe so, no.
I was just trying to think if we could do something about like forams and peat. Like a peat bog. But I guess you have an unpeated Scotch, or so they claim.
On foram size sorting through steeping through peat, something like that.
What was that? Stroop steeping?
Steeping. I was trying to tie in my matcha tea. Steep. That's a verb, right? It's not a very common one. I don't like it.
It was like
You don't like steeping?
sexual selection in Scottish forams.
Scottish
Subtitle.
forams, eh?
Or foraminiferal fossils on Isle of Islay and the effects of green tea on their sexual selection.
I see what you're reaching for. I'm seeing what you're feeling around the edges of. I like the idea of some sort of Scottish foram situation.
Sex ratio of the Scottish foram.
Sex ratios in Scottish forams. It's pretty straightforward for one of our titles, which
Right.
tend to be a little sillier.
Something about
Sex. Well, we got it. So sex ratios in Scottish forams can be like the pre or post colon part.
right.
What about lock alive sex ratios in fossil forams of Scotland? Come on, lock alive? No, nothing.
Edward shares a name with the famous Scottish poet Edward Burns, right? Is that Edward Burns? Yeah. No, that's wrong. All right. Forget that. Back to the Scottish forums. Is anyone still on the mic? Where did everyone?
Yeah, I'm just stuck.
What if Edward did a study to see if Scotch would make forams benthic because they get all sluggish, whereas caffeine from green tea makes them all planktonic because they're like, look alive. They're not look alive. I already made that joke, but just like, you know.
Yeah. How about sexual dimorphism in metabolomic processing of alcohol and caffeine in Scottish forams?
Ooh, okay.
Let's start off that sentence with foremost ramifications. Foremost ramifications of foram equity and gender inclusion for ocean analysis. Scottish Highland analysis.
No, I kind of like foremost ramifications, sexual dimorphism, and metabolic processing of ethanol versus caffeine in Scottish foraminifera.
That's pretty good.
I like that.
Go with that.
Every once in a while, we come across one that sounds like it could be a real study.
Yeah. Congratulations on your degree, Edward.
That's the kind that Edward gets. All right.
It's impressive.
Good job with the tag there at the front, Charlie.
I do my best.
Well, now, Charlie, you can do your best by reading us the email that was sent in by Frank.
Yeah, so, or as he likes to go by, Folechno. Yeah, this guy dug way deep. So, PaleoPOWs, I found out about your podcast through Chad over at the Collapsed Sigh and have been listening since episode 205. The show is great, real people shooting the breeze and talking about science in a way that the average listener can follow along. I'm a bit disappointed to find out that the trailer trash talk gets cut from the podcast, since I liked how the discussion usually digresses into interesting science tangents and always comes back to the tried and tested research tool that is the HSX. Hollywood Stock Exchange, for those of you that just don't know. I'm so enamored with your podcast that I've gone back into the archive and started listening from the very beginning. I'm up to episodes 20 and thought that some of the podcasts were timeless and could have follow-up episodes. These have already happened, then great, and I look forward to hearing them as I work my way through the podcast. If not, you should do them. In particular.
Yeah, Frank, following up is not our strong suit.
We just live in the moment. Okay, so episode 13, Acid Queen, was on talking about ocean acidification as it's related to climate change. Since the IPCC, Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change, has published its third and final report, and now it's up to the politicians to make concrete plans. I think it would be great if you address whether or not ocean acidification is at all included in the climate models and or data presented in the report. Certainly, I think the amount of info related to climate change has drastically changed since November 2009. I can summarize that analysis in one sentence. Faster than we thought.
It's real bad.
Episode 20.
Do you know? I don't actually know. I mean, I don't know that you would include it in the climate models because it's not really a driver. It's more of an effect, right?
Right. It doesn't really drive climate, or it doesn't really affect climate, but it's definitely bad for life in the oceans, and it's It's an effect that I think is a much more direct measure of the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere, and it's the data are not nearly as jumpy, or they're unambiguous, right?
It will be an
effect. Getting more acidic.
I don't know how strong of a feedback loop this would be. I mean, what percentage or order of effect, but certainly like preventing carbon uptake through calcium carbonate shell formation and then burial in sea sediment, we're going to lose a carbon sink.
Yep.
That's a good point. But yes, I mean, to the degree that we can even predict what the change in the pH of the surface ocean is going to be is part of what comes out of, these ever more precise and nuanced climate models. So yeah, it's a factor for sure.
All right. Another episode that Folechno brings up is episode 20 with Steve Novella, was on talking about skepticism in general. And it was specifically mentioned in the podcast that for a debate to truly be effective or fair towards scientists, that it should be set up in a certain way, moderation, standards for evidence, etc. Since this was aired in January 2010 and Bill Nye debated Ken Ham February 2014, I think it would be great to have Steve back on to talk about the debate, who won, whether it was effective or not, and how the publicity generated has been good/bad for science and pseudoscience. A new listener and a member of the Paleo Posse, Folechno. I don't even remember that debate. Who's Ken Ham? Is that the guy that has the crazy museum?
Yes, Ken Ham is the guy who has a creation museum in Kentucky and is trying to build the Ark.
Okay.
I don't remember how I felt back in 2010 or even more recently in 2014, but I'm increasingly of a mind that these sorts of debates are never effective for the scientists to do.
Yeah, I think it just gives a platform for the people hurting the cause.
Yeah, I'm increasingly of a mind that when the person you're debating, the thing that they're arguing for has no foundation by which it could be true, I don't know that debating about that is effective or a good use of outreach energy.
Yeah, I mean, what's that George Bernard Shaw quote or whatever? Like, if you wrestle with a pig, you get dirty and the pig likes it.
Well, I don't even know that it's that so much as just, well, yeah, I think there's an element of that, but I don't know that you're definitely not going to convince the person you're debating. And I don't know that there's much by the way of public understanding of how debates actually work. Like, I don't know. I mean, look at something like a debate that we actually see more often, something like the presidential debates. Do those serve a function other than to see who is the better performer of a debate? Like, but in terms of actually debating things, even with somebody who's trying to be a moderator, all it takes is one disruptor or one bad actor or one person who's not actually there to play the game for it to not be effective, I think.
Or perversely effective to the point where it increases the ratings and then the networks further promote the defector or the person disrupting the debates.
Yeah, I just don't know. I don't know that as a form of communication and science outreach, debate is where I think scientists should be putting forward their energy. I don't know. What do you think, Patrick?
Well, I kind of agree that a typical sort of debate platform is just kind of who says words better, which is not, a way. It's a way to judge the two people, but it's not a way to judge the idea that they're debating necessarily. But science in general is in need of some people that say words well so that other people can understand them. And that's part of why we started the show. I don't know if we're fulfilling that obligation, but we were in pursuit of that to some degree when we started this. So it's not a problem that's going away, and it's a problem that science and scientists should take seriously. But yeah, I'm not sure you can judge an idea based on basically what you were saying, two performers that talk about it on stage.
Yeah, it's happened before that people have asked us to have creationists on to debate with us on this podcast. And I've kind of said no, just because like I said, I don't think it's effective. I don't think it's convincing. I think you're just giving a platform to a person who maybe doesn't have I don't know. It's something I think about. I think my opinion on this may change and evolve as I continue to experience the world, but where I'm at right now, I'm not sure that unless I feel like a conversation between two people without an audience is going to go a bigger distance towards actually convincing somebody of something else. I don't know. I'm just rambling.
I think you're kind of onto something. A conversation where you're not trying to win it.
Yeah.
But you're talking about when the other person, you're willing to concede when the other side has good points, and maybe when they need to, I don't know what the right way is.
Yeah, it has to be a really well structured debate, like Felichno mentioned in his email. But I mean, I think the rhetoric behind debate has really fallen from grace, mainly from right-wing pundits like Bill O'Reilly and Ben Shapiro, where it's more about like logic traps and gotcha isms, where you've trapped the person you're debating with in a very minuscule straw man like slip up, and then therefore their entire thesis is debunked somehow.
Right.
So I guess you need a really good moderator to call people out on their rhetorical tricks and just be like, okay, cute, let's get back to the actual debate.
Right, but they're usually structured in such a way that you give, a certain amount of time to each side, and then there's some time for rebuttal, and then the audience votes, or you just go home and think about to yourself who you thought won.
Bill O'Reilly will always give you the last word after he yells at you for 10 minutes.
And then cuts your microphone. There was a podcast I listened to for a little while called Intelligence Squared. I believe it was a British production. They might have had an American version as well. And it was like a debate show that was usually debating a much fuzzier, like something like creationism versus evolution. For me, there's not a lot of wiggle room there. Like, I would have a hard time thinking of an argument that a creationist could make in their pursuit to damage or discredit evolution that I would say like, oh, fair point.
Right.
Because anything that they would say that would technically reduce confidence in evolution is something that I probably also agree. Like, the fossil record is incomplete. Okay, yeah, but like your explanation of how everything got here doesn't solve that problem either. But this Intelligence Squared one, it had more, the question was always much more nuanced, and then they would survey the audience before the debate started, and then they would survey the audience after the debate ended. So you actually could get sort of a metric of who won, quote unquote. But even then, it did usually come down to who was the better speaker, like who was more eloquent and articulate, or even just forceful and loud and passionate. I was going to say passionate. I was trying to be kind. So yeah, even like the best moderated and debates that aren't about like truth and facts, that are actually about like a philosophical topic that has a lot of nuance and room to move about, I still don't know that debate is a very effective tool right now.
I mean, I don't know that, other than sort of political elections and apparently creation versus evolution, I don't know that many things that get debated. Right?
There's this English like quiz show I liked a lot a few years back with Stephen Fry. I mean, that's probably why I liked it.
QI, quite interesting.
Yeah.
I love QI.
So that was an interesting twist on the debate format where he posed different questions and you could argue for or against it, or just say something completely nonsensical. And it's humorous and light, but still really informative.
Yeah, QI is great. It stood for quite interesting, and it was ostensibly a game show where the panelists were competing against each other. Stephen Fry would ask a question. You would get points for either giving the correct answer or saying something that was related and interesting, and you would lose points if you gave an answer that was considered obvious. And the obvious answer is usually also the one that most people would just answer with their gut reaction. And so like one of the examples I remember, and Charlie, you might debate this, and there were definitely times where I thought that what they claimed was the correct answer was maybe not so correct. But there was one where they asked like, how many moons does Earth have? And so everybody buzzes in and somebody says 1, and then klaxons go off because that was one of the obvious answers that the producers of the show had designated ahead of time as one of the obvious answers, because there are multiple rocky objects in orbiting Earth right now besides just our moon.
And Trojans, yeah.
So you could make an argument that we technically have more than one moon. We have the one that we can all see, and then there's other ones, smaller ones.
And we chucked up thousands of our own moons at this point.
Exactly. So that was kind of the way that the show went. But yeah, I think I don't know how you would gamify debate about topics of politics and religion. I mean, because ostensibly, the creationism debate is a religious versus a science debate. How, whatever the trappings of science are placed around it. So it's like you're taking the two things that you're not supposed to talk about in polite company and saying, how do we actually have a meaningful discussion about them? I just don't know that doing it with an audience is ever that helpful, or where the presenters are trying to perform for an audience, implied or otherwise.
Yeah.
And I feel like the debate has shifted to just social media. We're just debating about everything all the time, but nobody's actually convincing anybody. You just unfriend people when they annoy you to the point of you don't want to see their their hot take anymore, right?
Right.
So just don't know. I did an episode of Skeptoid where I responded to the points made by a creationist lecture I'd been to. But even then, when I went to the lecture, it was like, well, this is billed as a lecture. There's going to be a question and answer portion, but it would be very rude of me to monopolize the question and answer portion by just bringing up all the stuff that this guy got wrong. And so I, went about it a different way. I thought, well, I have a lot to say about this, but I'm going to use a platform that I have. I'm going to let him have his platform. And I even had a conversation with the guy afterwards and told him I was probably going to work on something that was going to refute some of the points that I felt like he got wrong. And he was fine with that. But I think going into it in a very non-confrontational way, where I told him, hey, I really disagree with a lot of what you said, but I didn't want to rain on your parade when you were invited here to give a talk, I think went further towards building a bridge than if I had been confrontational in a room where most of the people were likely to be on his side because they came to see him anyways. I don't know. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. No, totally.
So maybe that's the future, is just taking a breath and more of a long form response that's not necessarily meant as a direct attack of the person in the moment. I also think we're just really bad at reacting to stuff in the moment. I think we get it's very easy to get offended or upset in the moment when the little bit of time and distance can go a long way towards not having hurt feelings.
No, agreed. We all need to learn how to listen. It's not a quality that's emphasized in the hyper individuality that's celebrated in America, at least.
For the most part, this leads into our next PaleoPOW, but for the most part, the debate in scientific disciplines takes place in journals rather than in the moment, right? You spend a long time.
And even then, it's still hard not to take personally.
Yeah. You spend a long time gathering your evidence and constructing laying out an argument in a well sort of supported way instead of sort of zingers and logic traps like Charlie was saying earlier.
Well, I completely forgot we had another PaleoPOW, so why don't we go ahead and transition over to there. I was going to make a joke about how we've failed to learn how to listen, and I was going to tell everyone to take their headphones out because the show's over, but it's not over. Patrick, you have an email.
We have an email from...
Oh, thanks for writing in, Frank. It's a good email. Good discussion fodder. Appreciate it. Sorry, go ahead now, Patrick.
We have an email from Aleesa S. She's writing in about episode 295, where we were talking about publishing and scientific publishing specifically. And she says, hello. I really enjoyed your discussion in episode 295 about scientific publishing and was reminded of a meeting I attended this summer that included a publish or perish panel. I highly recommend giving the video of the panel a watch/listen, link below, particularly if you want to get your righteous anger going. There definitely seems to be a shift in how younger scientists think about the idea of scientific publishing, but that shift is being dampened by advisors dictating what journals, papers get submitted to, what journals, your manuscript gets submitted to. In the panel, a representative from EMBO, that's the European Molecular Biology Organization, mentioned that new rules requiring open access could severely hurt society journals, which isn't something I had ever considered before and wasn't something I recall hearing you mention in the episode. Do any of you have a take on how to, or if we should, balance any new rules requiring researchers to publish publicly funded research in open access journals with the potential drawbacks those rules could have on society journals that recycle their profits back into the society? And she gives a link where we can watch this panel,
which we'll include in the show notes on scienceswarm.com.
Sure. She says, thank you for the great show. It makes endless data processing much more enjoyable. Aleesa S. All right. Thank you, Aleesa. Let's see. Thoughts on this. I didn't watch the entire panel. I think this video was something like an hour and 40 minutes long. I did watch a little bit of it. And I think that it is possible. Well, first of all, lots of journals have incorporated a sort of a two-track publishing menu option, one where you more or less pay less money to get your article published and it's behind a paywall, and then one where you pay more and it becomes open access. So I don't know why society journals can't go that route. I think potentially open access journals will be tough on society journals, but I think society journals are going to have some trouble surviving it. I mean, lots of societies have trouble sort of keeping themselves afloat as it is, right? There are major societies in every discipline, but there's also ones that are falling by the wayside every year. Disciplines that just aren't as exciting as they used to be, 50 or 70 years ago when a lot of these societies were started.
I know the Alchemical Society. I haven't heard from them for a while. I just have an innocent question. I'm not trying to be snarky, but what is the benefit of the society? Like recycling the profits back into the society, but what purpose does the society serve?
Yeah. I mean, in general,
I've kind of found them to be insular, like old men clubs.
Right.
But
they have a meeting annually and they have a journal and they give out a few scholarships and awards to themselves.
Yeah. It's kind of masturbatory, but anyways.
Well, the other point I'll make is that in this video she sent, there's some people saying that even some fairly high-ranking journals like Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences are seeing some fall in influence because they're not open access. And I'm like, well, that's kind of like saying, I don't know, what's a channel that used to have great shows on it and Discovery. Now everybody just watches Netflix instead. Yeah, that's kind of like saying everybody just watches Planet Earth on Netflix when used to you'd go to Discovery Channel to watch that. I mean, it's true. It's not saying the content's not available. It's just saying you don't have the sort of trusted provider of, well, you were trusting a provider to give you high quality content and you were assuming that they were keeping up their end of the bargain, which may or may not be true.
I would be curious to know, are most of these societies that we're talking about like running at a profit? And if so, how much of that money is coming from the publishing fees that they charge to probably their own members, by and large, who are already paying society dues? And I almost wonder if you put it to a vote, if you took like some of the middle-sized societies, like societies that aren't in danger of collapsing, but aren't your AGUs and your GSAs and your truly giant organizations, right? And I wonder if you asked the members, put it to a vote and said like, hey, what if your yearly dues went up by X amount, but if you are a member of the society, you can publish in our journal open access for free, essentially, or for a very nominal fee. Like, I feel like unless it is the publishing fees that are actually generating a majority of the profit for the journal, which is probably not a sustainable business model in the future anyway, like there's maybe a workaround. And I'm not suggesting that my workaround would work. I'm just saying it's not inconceivable that there's space to innovate here. Because like Charlie said, it's very insular. If it's a smaller society, most of the members are dues paying members. Most of the members are going to be the ones publishing in the journal. So you're just charging people 3 times. You're charging them to be a member of the society. You're charging them to publish their article. And then if the article is not open access, you're charging them again to access that article. And so to me, that's like, economically, I'm not an economist, but economically, that seems like a system that people are going to try to find a workaround to. And open access and preprint servers seem to be some of the workarounds that people are trying.
Yeah, and I don't know why, who reads a physical journal anymore, and who doesn't just go to Web of Science when they're doing a literature review. You don't start by flipping back through the back issues of your favorite journal. I just don't see this as being the
future of science.
Yeah, the way science is done anymore.
Yeah, I think you're probably right.
So I feel like peer review in general is a good idea. I think that a lot of scientists that don't necessarily become academics, I feel like there's a lot of research that's been done that never sees the light of day just because people don't want to go through the abuse is a strong word, but through the gate that is peer review. And I think it should be obvious what's been peer reviewed and what hasn't. But I think if you wrote a thesis or a dissertation, that should be put out there as a report of some sort. It doesn't have to be an article. You can be clear that it wasn't peer reviewed to the degree that a journal article is expected to be, but that stuff needs to be accessible. And I think that science sometimes we like to think that we're really smart and we like to hold ourselves to high standards, but I think sometimes we shoot ourselves in the foot when we do that.
I don't even know if we're smart. I think we're good at designing complex systems.
Yeah. It could be.
When we've done an excellent job when it comes to scientific publishing of creating an overly complicated system. And like we talked about in our original discussion back in 295, none of us has the answer to this. But if we let evolution act, I think, yes, there might be some styles of publishing that go extinct, but I think we'll be better off in the long run.
Yeah. All right. So Aleesa, I'm not sure if we got exactly what you were asking us, but I think that's our take on it in general, that I think that open access and having some way of less resistance to get especially data out there that you've gathered, or a negative result to get that out in the literature, even if it's not peer reviewed, that making that more accessible to both scientists and non-scientists would be a good thing. And that as much open access as possible, I think in general, we think is a good thing. And that societies are important. I think they've been important in our careers, that we've had certain societies that helped us network and help push us forward. But I think that some societies, will exist regardless. And I think we're willing to let some societies go in order to further publishing in a way that more people would have access to the data and to the conclusions.
Well put, Patrick.
Yeah, I got nothing to add. So thanks for writing in. I like when people write in with good discussion topics. I know we kind of did a double down on the discussion this time, but I kind of want more like discussion focused PaleoPOWs. So that's something I'm going to be looking for in the future. Just FYI to both you, my hosts, and the listeners.
Sounds good to me.
All right. Well, with that, I think we have nothing left to discuss. So I will leave it at that. Check out the show notes for this episode with links to the things you can go look at. ScienceWorld.com is where you can find that. And we also are on Facebook and Twitter and our Amazon affiliate. I'll plug that again, right, Patrick?
Yeah, that's great. Please come follow our links to go to Amazon, buy whatever you were going to buy. It doesn't cost you a price that's any different than what you were going to pay, and we'll get a tiny percentage to help support the show.
All right. Well, next episode, we have our final AGU episode, AGU 5, The Empire Strikes Back in Star Wars chronology. But nothing will be striking back. The only thing you'll be getting is a whole lot more delightful science.
Sort of.
Visit sciencesortof.com for show notes, links to all the stories we talked about, and ways to interact with the hosts, guests, and other listeners. Science Sort of is brought to you by the Brachiolobe Media Network of podcasts, with audio engineering by Tim Dobbs of the Encyclopedia Brunch podcast. That's all for this week. See you next time on Science Sort of.
Why did you send a screen grab of the...
Are you talking to me or to Charlie?
Yeah, you sent through a image that's just our conversation. Is this recording?
That was unintentional.
Where is that?
In the chat. You guys are so bad at this. What happened?
Oh, in the chat over there.
What? I don't even see the chat. Set the chat. Oh, me sending this? Yeah, when I tried to unshare my screen, I clicked the wrong icon and it just took a picture of all this.
I sometimes when I'm editing these in the clear light of day, I'm just listening and be like, did Patrick and Charlie get hit in the head right before we started recording this? Like, what happened to my friends? Yeah. I hope you guys are okay. Yeah.
All right.
What did you do?
Did you do the same thing?
Yes.
On purpose. That is stupid.
All right. I'm going to bed.